This is a review of the Norwegian-Danish Ragnarok series presently on Netflix by Adam Prise and Emilie Lebeck. I will use a problem that I'm seeing in this series to explore what mythology is and how it should be used and how it should not be used. There'll be spoilers. On this channel I'm trying to communicate traditional knowledge, and sometimes this goes through applying traditional knowledge perspectives on something in our contemporary world. I'm increasingly inspired by the thinking of the Aboriginal Australian complexity thinker Tyson Yunkaporta, and he emphasizes how traditional knowledge, what he calls indigenous knowledge, is not so much a what as it is a how. And this way of doing things, creating traditional knowledge as processes of thinking rather than as pieces of information, is something that I'm playing with or trying to incorporate. And this review here takes a critical form as an example of doing this. Right. I know that a lot of people really love the Netflix series Ragnarok, and I totally understand this. In many ways, it's super appealing. The narrative is contemporary, realistic. This teenage setting is surprising and placing the narrative in these transformational persons. It's humoristic at times. It even takes in some outlandish aspects of using Nordic myths sometimes. And the notion of deities manifesting through humans is not bad at all, I think. It's also racially inclusive. Really important whenever you're touching Nordic myth, and there is something touching and powerful about the process of the lead figures, I think. But there's a problem, and boy, it is a big one. But I'll get back to that in a little while. I first have to explain a little bit of the background of what mythology is and what the Ragnarok myth is. You can see more about this in my mythology playlist, where I have some different explorations of you could say mythic explorations. And here it just suffices to say that I see myths as narratives that create relation. And this is why also problems appear when people don't really understand this. One example is these new atheists who are often not scholars of religion, and therefore tend to throw about these sort of common sense notions that, as a narrative, the Bible doesn't have qualities that are different from the stories about Donald Duck or something like that. And I think an undergraduate history of religion student ought to be able to reason that nobody ever thanked Donald Duck for being cured of cancer or started a war in the name of Donald Duck. So in my opinion, it ought to be a total no-brainer that Donald Duck and Jesus are very different kinds of protagonists. Jesus have a very high impact on how people relate to each other, to their own lives, and to, well, everything in the world, basically. And this is also why the myths that we tell each other, they should be handled with the utmost caution, competence, and wisdom, because they can go dysfunctional, and we're actually seeing that quite a lot. Dysfunctional myth making. I've already spoken about one very salient example of this, and that's conspiracy theories, which from a traditional knowledge perspective are dysfunctional myth weaving that misapplies intention and subjectivity on human agents, because our modernist rationalist worldviews prevents us from perceiving personhood and intention in stuff that happens outside humans. For instance, COVID-19, it can't have a subjectivity and intention in the modernist perception. So we can't engage it as a person, and therefore we struggle to see human intention that underlying or we see the intention that underlies the pandemic or the subjectivity as human, as something that human agents engineered. Anyway, this is a very condensed version of this argument, and you can see it elsewhere. Again, I have a little bit of my understanding of this also with inspiration from Yunkaporta that I mentioned before. He mentioned the term metaphors rather than myths. And metaphors form the intersection between the physical world and the dreaming in Yunkaporta's idea. In this sort of deep and dynamic Aboriginal understanding of reality, metaphors, if they lack integrity, if they're undynamic, reductive, simplistic, lack multifaceted meaning or capacity to create relation, then they are deceptive, and they become curses. And this can, of course, also be willfully constructed if you want to hurt someone. But deceptions are dysfunctional myths, dysfunctional metaphors. And right, as I have abundantly ranted about, the Ragnarok myth is a myth of collapsed interconnectedness. The complex webs of interchanges, kinship, social contracts, transformations, and identifications collapses, and this web that used to tie together the gods, the Aesir, the Vanir, with the Ginnrunar, who intermarry and identify with each other, play games, deceive, exchange wisdom, employ each other, make babies and descend from each other in all kinds of ways. This web of connectedness collapses, because the fratricide of Balder is such a break of kinship, cosmic kinship, that interconnectedness unravels like drawing a thread of yarn out of a knitted sweater. And this is an animist understanding that analyzes the Ragnarok myth. The deep meanings of the Ragnarok myth are opened through this understanding. Through this perspective, the dreaming is put into contact with our world, you could say, in a way that aims to understand interconnectedness and its collapse. It's a very contemporary, yet very much in contact with the original myth as an analysis of collapse in the web of relating that sustains the harmonious world. The problem with the Ragnarok series is that it does that in a very incomplete and perhaps even deceptive way. It tries to copy-paste onto our ecological breakdown one single aspect, one single very superficial aspect of the Ragnarok myth, the confrontation between the gods and the Ginnrunar, that is universalized as if it was just the way it is. The Ginnrunar, represented by the Utul family, are almost evil. They find emotion repulsive, weird idea. The series actually explicitly shares its understanding of the Nordic cosmos and myth. The lead figure is listening to a book, and it reads, and I'm quoting directly from the series here, "The Nordic gods represented law and order. The Ginnrunar, chaos, and the world of the Vikings was so simple that the gods killing the giants was not seen as evil, but as a necessity in maintaining the balance in the world, because if the forces of chaos grew too strong, the world would end." Now this sounds kind of right in a common sense schoolbook kind of way, but in my view it's actually directly incorrect. It's not because the gods don't kill the Ginnrunar enough that the world ends. It's the opposite. It's because the connectedness to the Ginnrunar breaks down. War on the Ginnrunar is a symptom of the Ragnarok. It's not a way of preventing it. The problem with this reductive and simplistic understanding underlying this contemporary myth making is that the Ragnarok series totally mislabels the agents causing our ecological collapse. The Ragnarok series narrates the collapse as caused by the Ginnrunar, instead of reading it as caused by our disconnect from these forces. It isn't the trolls that cause the Ragnarok, the Ginnrunar. It's our rupture from interconnectedness with the trolls that's causing it. It's us that's a problem, and blaming the Ragnarok on the trolls enforces our disconnect from them, right? Hence enforcing the root of the problem, pushing us further towards the actual escalating eco-Ragnarok, right? We should start sharing bed and wisdom with the Ginnrunar again. That's the solution, not narrating them as demons causing pollution. It's our social system that causes environmental collapse, not the forces of nature. It's a very dangerous misapplication of the Ragnarok myth, and this makes the series into basically a curse, I think, in Juncker Porter's sense, that drives us further towards the Ragnarok. It's an intersection between the dreaming and the physical world without integrity, a dysfunctional mythology. It is what could perhaps in a Nordic terminology be called Ginnrunar. I'm inspired here by Iron Age rune stones that have this word, and I use it as meaning runes of deception. Gin, the word gin, or the root gin, has meanings both of power and deception. And Ginnrunar is sometimes just interpreted as power runes, but the word is found on a couple of rune stones of the so-called Bleking group stones from just prior to the Viking Age, where the carver states that he hides Ginnrunar to invoke dark curses, maleficence, and insidious death through malicious guile on the one that breaks the monument. Right. So that's just to say that it's possible to read the word Gin or Ginnrunar as curses of deception, malicious guile. So yeah, we could say that this kind of narration of a myth is a Gin rune, creating a deceptive image of the Ragnarok myth that creates unrelation, an invocation that disconnects and thereby causing the eco-Ragnarok. Now, I've pestered the production with behind the series with emails after season 1 about asking me or someone who knows what they're talking about into some counseling before continuing this basically mythic weaponizing of the Ragnarok story into invoking environmental collapse. But I think asking people today who produce myth to take myth seriously is a bit like asking politicians to take seriously that humanity is presently facing the most atrocious collapse in the history of our species. It's really beyond me. The people who are narrating myth seems to not be appreciating what myth is, what it can do, and what power there actually is in it. It is as if they think it is only Donald Duck in their perception, that there isn't just any little aspect of mythic relevance with agency in the story that they're producing. Right. So I don't know. I think they should take a very deep breath, before they go into season 3 and before continuing what until now appears to me to be a complete mythic traffic accident. But I do think it's still possible to save it. So if you are Adam, please, and you're watching this, and drop me an email. I already wrote your people several times. If you invite me in to help a little bit with season 3, then I'll take all this back, and we can actually make it work. And I think it could be amazing if some actual traditional knowledge of the Ragnarok mythology was to be applied in the creation of this contemporary myth making. Great, thanks a lot and see you around.